Nancy Kessler. Thank you so much for joining me on the latest version. Nancy, you are the founder and owner of Memoirs Plus, a very interesting business that you founded at the age of 58. And you're telling me it's okay for me to mention your age. I've talked about myself. I'm 60 at the moment, and I think I'm loving being 60, so I'm not going to worry about age at all. So you had a very interesting journey to founding your own business. And why don't you tell me a little bit about what Memoirs Plus is? And then let's talk about your journey to the point of your founding that.
Sure. Hi, Betsy.
Hi.
I founded the company 7 years ago, and I had a hard time coming up with the title, so I decided to use Memoirs Plus so that I could give myself some wiggle room to do other things. But primarily, I write memoirs in the voice of the person who's I'm interviewing. Most of my clients are very old seniors. I would say they're in their 80s and 90s, and some in their early hundreds. And what we do is we put their stories into a hardcover book that also helps the family organize all their family photographs and memorabilia. And we have audio tapes and video available after the project's completed. So it's an intergenerational piece where I have grandchildren and great-grandchildren contribute their stories as well.
And a lot of your projects end up as in book format. Is that right?
Primarily, right now, they're in hardcover books. And I imagine in the future that we will be going more digital. I do offer digital ebooks and Kindle books now. But people in their 80s and 90s really prefer a hardcover book at this point.
Well, sure. And let's face it, digital technology changes so rapidly. Here at the latest version, I'm a broadcaster from early on, in my early 20s, and I had samples of my work on reel-to-reel, which we were able to have transferred to CD. But now I brought them into the studio to, excerpt for the latest version. And then we're like, I don't even have a CD player. How do I even? So, we think we're on the cutting edge of some things. And sometimes a book is maybe the best thing. So
I often joke that the only thing left may be a book because, we're trusting that the cloud is going to keep all of this. And I'm worried that someday they may not. So having a hardcover book is really valuable. Even to the younger generation, they seem to really like having a book about their family.
So tell me about your journey to the point where you founded Memoirs Plus. You seem to have a very interesting, multifaceted background.
That's right. I've reinvented myself several times, some out of necessity. And I basically was a child who loved to listen to stories. So I was often sitting in the kitchen because that's where the best stories were told in most families. And so I was a quiet child and I would just listen to the adults talking, and I was collecting stories at a very young age. I actually had a neighbor, Mrs. Blanchet, and she would give out butterscotch candy right before dinner. So all the kids would ring the bell and run away. And I was drawn into her Victorian parlor where she would tell me about living in the 19th century in the town that I grew up in New Jersey.
Wow. So
I really credit, the elders in my life at a young age for getting me interested in history. So I went to college and became very interested in museum studies. And I then went to the Cooperstown graduate program in upstate New York, and I became a museum curator at the Museum of the City of New York. I was there for several years in the paintings, prints, and photographs department. and I learned a lot about how to put up exhibits. I had a lot of fun, but ultimately it was not a very rewarding, financially rewarding career. So I left to, and then I worked for the Koch administration in the Department of Transportation. And for a while I had a catering business because I love to cook. I've done many different things. I've worked for architects, lawyers, all sorts of people. But basically, I was collecting skills. I didn't even know what skills I was collecting for. But it all made sense to me when when I was 58, I got fired from my job, and I found it absolutely impossible to find a traditional job. Wow. I just wasn't getting interviewed. I remember one position I came close, but they said they picked somebody who was a little bit more perky.
Oh.
So I thought, well, that meant younger. Because I think I'm still perky. But I decided at that point, I had been working with seniors earlier and really loved doing any kind of work with seniors. And I decided I was going to start some kind of business and create a business at age 58. So I took a class that was offered by the Women's Enterprise Development Center here in Westchester. And it was a 60-hour entrepreneurial class. And they taught us every aspect of starting a business. And when I started, I really didn't know which aspect of working with seniors I was going to pursue. And a lot of the things that I was interested in doing, my instructor said, that's been done. That's a little boring. I don't know that that's going to fly. And during that period, somebody asked me to do a memoir of a woman named Germaine. And she was born in Iraq and moved to Iran. And her husband died at a young age. And she was running a Max Factor cosmetic business as a single woman under Ayatollah Khomeini.
Wow.
And he tried to take her children away. She whisked them off to Switzerland. She was taking money all the time out of the country. She actually showed me the purse where she smuggled the money out with a fake bottom.
Wow.
And she ended up in Greenwich, Connecticut. And, her grandfather had been a pasha in the Ottoman Empire. She really had an incredible history. So we did a memoir for her 90th birthday, and we called it The First 90 Years.
Wow. That's great.
Yeah.
What a story. It sounds like a movie. It sounds like, in fact, maybe it was a movie.
In fact, she was on the plane when the Canadian hostages got released.
I was just thinking about that story.
So the movie Argo is about that. And she was sitting next to someone who was just recently freed.
Oh, my gosh.
As soon as they hit a certain point, the pilot came on and everybody started cheering. So she had a remarkable story. And in fact, she fell about a week after her 90th birthday. And then from then on, she only spoke in Arabic.
Oh.
So we were just so fortunate to get her story and even some of her recipes.
Wow.
Before she deteriorated. But, the family is always grateful to have the words of the person directly telling the story.
That is amazing. That's, it just shows you when you open yourself up to these different kinds of possibilities or experiences, you don't know what you're going to run into. And it sounds like you probably have had a similar experience with a lot of your clients. Looking on your website, there's a page as a page from one of the books as a sample project of a woman whose wedding day she was getting married in New York City on August 1945, and someone ran into the ballroom and said, "The war is over." I mean, that is an incredible story, and that's probably a story that was passed around, always told around the Thanksgiving table or something like that. But to have that, printed on the page that can be then passed down to future generations. That's an incredible gift that you're giving those families.
I had that story, and then there's one family where the man was being drafted into the Army, so they decided on a Friday night to get married on the Sunday of Thanksgiving weekend. And they had a full formal wedding. I have like a to-do list that they did. They had invitations, they had bridesmaids, they had the correct clothing. It was incredible. They put it all together like a whole formal wedding in a day and a half.
Wow. That's those are those lives of that generation are really interesting. Tell me about, you talked about the skills you collected over the years that have helped you from this point. Because I think when people, think, how can I start something new when I don't know anything about a particular field? But I think maybe if you look at what you've been doing up until this point, you realize, I learned how to do this, or I can apply what I learned in one area to another area.
Definitely. Well, the museum work has come in most handy because I often tell my clients I'm making an exhibit of their lives. It's just in a book form, but it's very much like the same as putting an exhibit on the wall. Mm-hmm. And I also worked in publishing for over 10 years, so that certainly has helped me know what a book should look like. And though I'm constantly learning that. And then, when I worked in different offices, I gained skills in bookkeeping, QuickBooks, finances, insurance policies, things like that. And also the program that I took, the business class. I would encourage anyone starting a business to go to a women's business center because they're funded by the SBA and they have a lot to offer and show great success rates.
Right. Let's talk about that because I think people need to know there are resources out there if you are, as you did, I have this great idea for a business or I want to, talk to someone about forming an idea, getting a business plan and things like that there are resources in the community for people to make sure that they get started off on the right foot. You did so well through the Women's Enterprise Development Center located in Westchester County, New York, that now you're on the board. Is that right?
Yes, I am.
Uh-huh. So what would you suggest that people do who are not in Westchester, maybe in other parts of the country? Where do you think they might look?
Well, there are these centers everywhere. And even though they may be called a women's business center, they do accept some men. But they're usually limited to taking local people. So you need to find your local women's business center. There's also SCORE, which is that has more men, retired men that give advice, but they offer a lot of very good programs. I think taking some kind of class really increases your rate of survival in owning a business because there's so many aspects that you just don't think about ahead of time. And they prepared me for everything I needed to know legally, with branding, marketing, all aspects of the business. And I've been paying it back because I thought the program was so worthwhile that being on the board has really been nice. And also volunteering in the community, I think, is a big part of starting a business so that you get familiar with the people who are, you're able to network in your communities. through Betsy, I also started a networking group of women business owners who service seniors in Westchester. So I have that group. It's called the Betsy Senior Providers Network. And so there's all sorts of opportunities. I did an awful lot of networking when I was just starting out. Mm-hmm. And I'm a great one-on-one person. This was obviously before COVID. I could sit down and have a cup of coffee. I probably had at least 100 cups of coffee with different people just to tell my story, get to know what they were doing. I tried to figure out really what was going on globally in the field of aging before I started. And I think that being a lifelong learner, it was a really exciting thing for me to see not just the local movements, but what was going on.
You know, one thing I talked about in my first episode of the second series, I talk about the idea of longevity because I've come across this interesting book called The Renaissance Soul. Maybe you've heard of it. It's, you know, for people, I would say like us who have a lot of different interests.
This whole transition has actually made me feel younger, partially because I'm dealing with some very old people who give me a lot of wisdom about the end of life. So I'm not as afraid of it, I think, as some people might be. But I feel younger because I feel like I'm doing very authentic work. And it's very important to me that these seniors be honored while they're alive and that we're not just preparing all of this for a funeral. It's really a celebration of them. And so many people feel invisible as they get to be in their 80s and 90s. They don't feel like anyone wants to hear their stories anymore. So it's fascinating. I've had adult children who have hired me and they've said, I've heard every story 10 times. I don't need to even read the book. And then they open up the book and they're surprised because they do hear, every family hears a story that they never heard before. I haven't had one yet.
You know, I've had similar experiences where maybe someone very late in life tells you a story or you hear about that story from someone else and you're like, why didn't I know that? I would have wanted to know more about that. I have so many questions now. And it's, I think the idea that you want to do this while that person is still living so that those family members can ask those questions, because that's so valuable.
Absolutely. And at the end of life, people are more open to talking about stories. My own mother would deny things 20 years before. And then as she got closer to the end, she started telling me the stories. And sometimes she would repeat herself, but that gave me opportunity to ask further questions. So I do have a lot of clients who have early or sometimes later stages of dementia. And this can be very helpful for them because they do have those long-term memories. You know, we sometimes have to have a family member to make sure that the information is correct. But I have one woman I did a project for, and it was just photographs and captions, but her family photographs. So she just loves to go through this book. She can't really do much more than look at the pictures at this point. But it can be very therapeutic for people in different phases of dementia.
You know, I'm thinking of this time that we're in of COVID and how many seniors have been isolated from their families for such a long time, passing away without family members present. I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about the kind of work that you've been doing and the isolation that seniors have been facing and the separation.
Yes. So my business model was based on the fact that seniors feel socially isolated. And my ideal person is not someone who's going down to play bridge at the local senior center. They're more the person who's staying home, and the family's worried that they don't have anything to do. Mm-hmm. And if they're intellectually able, this can be a wonderful opportunity. So during COVID, I was called by some families that I had already completed a memoir, but they wanted me to sort of check in with their parents. I was making a lot of phone calls during COVID to try to just touch base with my clients, because my clients do become my friends. Yeah. And I love to keep up with them afterwards to see, how they're doing. I did have one woman, I'm just going to show the book here. It's Martha. She lived in an assisted living place, and she was busy every minute of the day, volunteering at the gift shop, and she was doing workouts with the personal trainer and meals, everything. And when COVID happened, she really withered and eventually passed away just from the social isolation. So I saw a number of my clients. I mean, she was 98 years old and lived a very full life, but it was a real strain for these seniors to struggle through the isolation.
Yeah. I want to go back to a part of your personal history, because I think it's very important for some of my listeners to know that you were able to kind of restart yourself. You were, I understand, divorced for a while. You were a single mom. You were also a caretaker to your own mother.
Yes.
How did you manage to do all of that?
Well, I took care of everybody else, like a lot of women's stories. And, I raised my children. My children were 1 and 3 when I got divorced, and they're now 31 and 33. And so I raised them. And then almost as soon as they were launched, my parents got ill, and so then I spent 7 years taking care of my mother. But she was a very progressive woman, and she was 88 when she died, so she lived a full life. But when she started to need care, she accepted the help that I gave her, but she also decided that she was going to reimburse me for the caretaking. So she helped me financially start my business by just offering to pay for groceries and gas.
Oh, nice.
And that was such a gift, because I had time to get on my feet with the business. Yeah. And she recognized that if she had to pay someone to do all of this, all that I was doing for her, it would cost a lot more. Sure. So I wish that that model would continue more in our society, because there's a lot of unpaid caregiving, and it takes a giant toll on the economy. And most of the people doing the caretaking are women. So I was very fortunate. I actually had a lot of fun taking care of my mother, because she was an interesting person, and we would do fun things together, and we would travel, and it was enjoyable.
Oh, you're lucky. Not everyone has that experience.
Right. A lot of people have, I have met a lot of people who say they dislike their parents. So I was just fortunate that my mother ended up being a friend just when, we needed it.
Oh, that's great. I always ask my guests if they have 3 pieces of advice for others who are on their journey. What have you learned along the way? If you could pass along some advice to those on their own journeys towards reinvention, a latest version, the next version, what would you share?
So I think go back to what you liked doing when you were very young, because just the way that I liked sitting in the kitchen listening to stories being told, that, if I had heard that when I was 20 years old, maybe I would be doing what I'm doing now. but I think I needed the wisdom of my years to get to where I am now. I think that it's important when you're starting a company to leave yourself some room to grow, because what you think the company is going to be may not end up being what it is. So for instance, by calling it Memoirs Plus, I'm able to teach memoir writing. I, am able to do a slideshow for somebody that wants it. I've done book parties and book launches, and I've grown the company in a lot of different directions. So I would say, don't try to pigeonhole yourself too much.
As we were saying, none of us thinks we're going to start the next Amazon. It's not like you want to or have to take over the world. It's just finding that niche that you can occupy very easily and comfortably, and offering something that is unique and that you're, uniquely qualified to be able to do.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes. I think everybody has different talents, and it's important to know, where your own weaknesses are in terms of starting a company. I was comfortable with the financials because I had done that for other offices. A lot of people really need to hire a bookkeeper, somebody right from the start. My biggest area where I needed help was in designing the books, because I liked doing it, but it was taking an amazing amount of time, and I'm not a graphic artist. So it was fairly easy to find designers that could whip them out in no time, whereas it was taking me a very long time. I also have a team of people behind me who are transcribing the tapes and scanning photographs. I have copy editors, proofreaders, someone I call a fresh eye. They look at the book when it's completely done.
I'm incredibly inspired. This is a really such an interesting field, and it seems adjacent to the other kind of newish field that I've discovered, which is photo management. So someone who comes in and manages the reams of photos, not only, maybe some people that I know have inherited a box of black and white snapshots with nothing written on the back. What do you do with that? Or, go ahead.
I have, that's one of the byproducts of the memoir, is that people give me their photographs. I scan them into a Google photo album, and the family gets those photographs with labels afterwards. So, it's not all of their photographs, but it's a big chunk. And I know I'm in the process of moving out of my home of 35 years, and I've had somebody scanning photographs for months now so that I don't have to move them all.
Wow. So you're scanning them, and then the hard copies, are you disposing of those? Or?
Well, I have to admit that I'm not disposing of them yet, but
that's hard to do, right? Especially,
but I have them organized so that they're not as haphazard as they were before, and there's a lot less of them.
Yeah, it's hard to know what is better. Is it better to have all these snapshots on an iPhone or a digital camera where, it's just kind of there in the cloud, or to have boxes as I do it, the old days when you had film and you just had boxes of, random photographs, some of them not great shots, right. But you feel bad throwing any of them away.
Well, I threw away a lot of the landscape travel pictures, that didn't have any people in them, and I also was taking pictures of my kids in the era where you had triplicate pictures.
Yes.
So there were just so many photos that were. But I mean, what I do when I am with a client is I get collecting their stories and then looking at the photographs to see what will illustrate it. So I'm not the only person out there that's doing this. There are a lot of people who offer memoir services of some kind. There's a lot of commercial places now that will, send you a prompt each week and you write your own. And there's value to any storytelling, as far as I can see. My unique approach is that I have more of a conversation with the person. So there's a little bit of back and forth. And if it's a 95-year-old who gets a little tired, I may put in a story of my own just to give them a rest. But I offer a more personal touch. I do all the interviewing myself.
Well, this is just such a wonderful thing that you're doing, and I'm sorry that my own parents are not around. And I think maybe a lot of us are thinking, "Gee, I could have done that too," or "I wish someone like you had been around for my parents or my grandparents," because I have this feeling of the generation that is passing, that World War II generation, the Depression kids who fought World War II, they lived through a historically just a remarkable time, of technological innovation, but historical import. And the more of those stories that we can capture, the better for future generations. It's an important story and time that won't come again. So
I'm encouraging everyone to write about their COVID experiences, because that's something everybody's going to want to know, is what did you do during this period?
Yeah.
I mean, we have very little documentation about what happened in the 1918 pandemic. So that's a gift you can give your children.
Yeah.
I have one client who's now 95, and she wrote this piece that I think is interesting. It's part of her book. And she says, "I am excited about doing this book. I'm also embarrassed. So many pictures of me, it makes me feel funny realizing that the subject of what I write is me. Is that egotistical, over the top, talking about me? I had my doubts. I'm still not sure. But doing it has reminded me of the life I've lived, the love I've loved, the learning, the talking, the listening, the joys, the sunrises and sunsets, the serious things that were not really so serious, the serious things that were serious, the bumps along the way. I remember the good stuff best."
That's beautiful.
It just makes, because everybody, when I first approached them about doing a memoir, they're like, "I'm not that important. I don't need a book about me." But it is such an honor to see their faces when they open up the book.
That's nice. Nancy Kessler, I can't thank you enough for being on the latest version. This has been a wonderful story. You've shared so much about yourself and what you're doing now, and clearly it's important. And I think maybe a lot of listeners are going to start thinking, I've got to get in touch with, whoever the elders are in our lives, if parents or elderly relatives, and capture those stories before it's too late, because things can change in a moment, and capturing those memories are really important for all of us. And I find this very inspiring. And also your journey towards starting your business and keeping it going. And it's just been great. And I appreciate your sharing it with us.
Thank you. Thank you. It's been a pleasure. And I hope people will visit my website, memoirsplus.com.
They can go to our website, the latest version, podcast.com, for more information about Nancy and her business. And so please do that. Okay. Thanks so much, Nancy. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks.